Hi, it's Thursday, March 17th, and I continue to read and wonder my way through the book of Genesis. And today we're finishing up Genesis chapter 47. Just a couple of verses 27 to 31. As we've gone through this chapter, that Jacob, the house of Israel, have settled happily in the land, and they're doing well there. But the famine continues, and we just recently heard that in one year it was so bad, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, they had no money. And so they essentially got a loan based on their livestock. So they sold their livestock to Pharaoh, as it were. They kept it and raised it and did that stuff. But now all the livestock belongs to Pharaoh, and then they got grain. The following year it wasn't better yet, so they had no livestock left. So then they essentially sold themselves and their land. And Joseph reckoned that as saying, okay, so now take the seed that you need, take the grain, go back to your land, and when you harvest, 20% goes to Pharaoh. 80% is for you to reseed, feed your family, feed your little ones, all that kind of stuff. So they end up they're in the text it calls them slaves and notes that Pharaoh owns the land. But they end up in a relationship with Pharaoh where they are on the land, they are farming it, they are doing it, and they are paying essentially a 20% tax every year to Pharaoh. So that's sort of where we left it off. But before we continue, see, that continued to bother me. So surely not everybody in Egypt and Canaan owned their land. Um, so what do you do if you're just a farmer on someone else's land? Does the owner of the land make that deal and the grain goes from them to you? Like it seemed confusing, and I'm not really clear about it. I likened it to paying income tax and to sort of living in land that you feel like you own, but you don't really. And because forever the historian, I checked into Josephus last night, Flavius Josephus, Roman Jewish historian, in the first century. So he actually wrote that when they sold themselves and their land to Pharaoh through Joseph, and Joseph said, "Fine, so now you'll pay 20%." He gave them back their land and their livestock. That's what Josephus believed. That's the way he reported it in his history of the time. Now, in fairness, Josephus is as removed from the events of Joseph in Egypt as we are from Josephus. The events in Egypt, if based in actual history, are like 1900 BCE, before Common Era. So go to the year zero, back up 1900 years. Where here we are, go to the year zero, move forward to, what is this? 2022. Josephus would know as much about Joseph as we know about Josephus. You follow me? However, the fact that Josephus wrote that indicates that there's a sense of how does that all make sense? It's a lovely story, but how did it work? They sold their livestock, they sold themselves, they sold their land, but that's not going to keep going because Joseph knows that there's more famine coming. So an arrangement by which they pay tribute, pay tax, an arrangement by which they recognize their fealty, their connection to Pharaoh, would work for them. So that doesn't really add much to what I wondered about yesterday, but I just wanted to throw that out there because it was sort of bothering me. So I looked it up, and the only historian you have who can tell you about that time period is Josephus, and let's be honest, we don't really know how reliable Josephus is. But it does tell me that a couple thousand years ago, someone was going how does that make any sense? And so that's how they made sense of it. Anyway, so let's go back into Jacob's life, because that's what we've got now. In the last few verses, we go back to Jacob. So it was about Jacob, then it's about everybody else. Now we go back to Jacob. Here we are. It's Genesis 47, verses 27 to 31. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen, and they gained possession in it, and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. When the time of Israel's death drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor with you, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal loyally and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my ancestors, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He answered, "I will do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself on the head of his bed. So Jacob sees his long-lost son Joseph and says, "Now I can die, because I have finally seen you." But in fact, he will live for 17 years. And in that 17 years, they will thrive. So by the time we jump to this moment, famine's over. It's 17 years, right? So we have survived the famine. And Jacob and the house of Israel have thrived. Well, sure, they've thrived, and maybe that was always Joseph's plan. They have this really good land in the midst of a famine, so they've got good land for their herds and their flocks, ample land. And if you remember, Joseph gave them bread enough to eat according to their numbers, so they're being fed. They don't have to take their savings and buy food in the famine. They have not had to sell their livestock. They have not had to sell themselves or the land that they are on. So they have been able to prosper. Land is theirs. Their flocks have grown. They haven't had to pay money out. They have stored money. They've done very well. One wonders how the others around them would have felt as they were thriving, it would seem. It says that they gained possession of it and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly. So while others are having to sell everything, including themselves, House of Israel within Egypt here is multiplying exceedingly. So you wonder a little bit about that tension. If it would have brought tension, I would have thought it would have. Anyway, but then Israel's time is drawing near. Jacob is coming close to death. So he calls his son Joseph. And he says to him, "If I have found favor with you." Well, I don't know why he'd have to ask. It's been 17 years, and he's taken pretty good care of Dad and his brothers, as far as we can tell. But nevertheless, maybe that's the thing you say. "If I have found favor with you, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal loyally and truly with me." Now, if you've been following these reflections, you'll recall that this has happened before. Put your hand on my thigh. Put your hand under my thigh. And in fact, the better translation is, well, you can imagine what the better translation is. Basically, his hand is on his father's penis. Basically, is what we're getting from this, which is kind of awkward and weird. Unless, of course, you stop and remember that the sign of the covenant is the circumcision, right? So that's the thing. Back when Joseph proved to his brothers who he was, I'm pretty sure he took his pants off. So again, he's asking him to place his hand on the sign of the covenant, as it were, and promise by that sign of the covenant. It's a covenant that God made with Abraham and all of Abraham's descendants. So it extends through them here. And so this is the moment when in a court of law today, many of us would opt to swear on a Bible. It's the same thing. This is say, I take this seriously. This isn't just, okay, yeah, I'll do it, I promise. No, 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 no. Put your hand under my thigh. There's no way not to make that seem awkward and weird. But anyway, it's put your hand on the sign of the covenant. And so Joseph does that. He still insists, swear to me. So make it real. And Joseph swears to him. And having heard that, it says, then Israel bowed himself on the head of his bed. I can imagine him just going like, okay. That's how that translates to me. However, it's also possible that he was standing, because the translation bowed his head on the head of his bed could also be on the head of his staff. It all depends really on how you read some of the ancient Hebrew. Head of his bed, head of his staff. So he could have been standing and just put his head down. It's all done. Whatever the translation, I get the same feeling. This is all that Jacob has been living for now. Everything else has come to pass, and this is like, okay, you've promised that you're going to bury me with my father and my grandfather. This is that. Then now I can rest. Now I can go. So what are we to make of this, other than that, sort of rather creepy thing that I had to point out to you? Well, when I think of the journey that Jacob has been on, and so I mean, let's remember that he was the less adored of the two brothers, at least by his father, but the smart one. Negotiated, did smart things. Was a heck of a shepherd. He has been lied to and cheated. He has been disrespected. And when those things have happened to him, he has lost faith. He has stopped talking to God. He has been angry at God. He has robbed his brother and then fled his brother and then reconnected with his brother, but still stayed away from his brother, although at the end he and his brother were able to bury their father. He has wrestled with God. Literally, some maybe metaphorically, I don't know, but there was a great wrestling, and he has claimed his blessing. He has fought hard for his faith, and I would suggest that when Joseph was taken from him, when he imagined Joseph dead, or I think even more to the point, suspected that his other sons had done something terrible, when that happened, the life went out of him, and again, it felt to me like he lost his faith. And now his faith has been restored. He's been restored to his son. His faith is restored. But now he's had 17 years of living well and things going extremely well. But when it comes time to getting a guarantee from his son, he does that with a reminder of the covenant. Place your hand under my thigh. The covenant, the circumcision. Jacob has not lost his faith. Now, we have seen that he has lost his faith along the way, or lost his spirit, but he has done what he can to reclaim his faith all the time. At least that's how I look at his life. If I was preaching his life, his father was not fair to him, at least so it seems, and yet his mother loved him and doted on him, and but he had some difficult times, but he got through those things. But he did it on his own guile, his own conniving, his own street smarts, his own sense, and that's not always worked out well for him. It's sent him running, but then he fell in love, and then he God spoke to him, and he saw God all around him, and then he fell in love, and then, oh my God, now it's great. So I've met God. I'm full of faith. I've met the woman I'm going to marry, and we're going to have this life. Only her father tricks him, and now he ends up with 2 wives, actually 4 wives, because you include the 2 maids. He wanted Rachel. He ended up with Leah and Rachel and the other 2 whose names have just slipped my mind. Doesn't matter. and he lost his faith in that. I think I reflected on that. He's running around from tent to tent. Who knows? It's a farce. It's a bedroom farce that's carrying on, and he stops talking to God. But then he does speak with God again, and he reclaims his faith. He loses his beloved son, and it seems to me he loses his faith. He comes back and reclaims his faith. So Jacob, for whom Israel is named, has wrestled with God, has lost his faith, reclaimed his faith, lost his faith, reclaimed his faith. And here at the very end, after all of this, he wants to be buried with his father and his grandfather. He wants to be buried acknowledging his faith, and he asks Joseph to swear to do it by acknowledging his faith, his hand under his thigh. For me, just this little passage, the message in this for me is that it's okay, or at least it's natural, when we lose our faith. It slips away. Sometimes it slips away because things are so bad that we are angry at God and we can't imagine that there is a God if this crap is happening to us. Sometimes things are happening to us and we feel it's our fault, but if we actually acknowledge that, it would make it worse, so we don't want to talk about God. Sometimes things are going so well, who needs God? It's all good. So we fall out of our faith. And those things happen. And all of those things, to me, have happened to Jacob. And yet he has intentionally reclaimed his faith. And that's the challenge for me, of course, to wonder, how is it that I reclaim my faith when my faith is weak? Or when I am so distracted by how great things are that I am no longer really thinking about my relationship with God and how I live that in the world. How do I bring myself out of the depths of despair? I find myself in Sheol. Things are horrible. Things are bad. And not only does it feel like God has given up on me, but I feel I have given up on God. How do I reclaim it? What are the things that we do? And it doesn't really tell us what Jacob does here, what Israel does to reclaim his faith, but reclaim it he does. So I go back to the night he wrestled with the angel. He sent his family away to be safe, as he awaited the arrival of his brother, of whom he was in fear. But he spent time alone by himself, and he wrestled with God. I wonder if that's one of the things that we do. We just shut everything out, and we dare to wrestle with God. We dare to shout in God's face and say, why? How? Not fair. Don't get it. I'm angry. I'm hurt. We wrestle with God. And in that we find our faith comes around. I go back earlier than that when he was referring to God as the God of his father, not his own God. But he stopped and made his sacrifice, and God spoke to him, and the world looked different. This is right before he met Rachel. Again, is that a matter of stopping and praying and daring to see the world anew? That seemed to work for him then. Here, in his old age, not being distracted by his own comfort and his success. I mean, things have worked out well for him. Everybody around him is starving, and he's not. That's not bad. His family is doing well. He is fulfilling the destiny of building these people, this house of Israel. But so he is fulfilling. So is that a way, which is to sit back and assess and go, now it's time for me to let go. I don't have to be in charge of everything forever. Is Jacob's health failing? Is he just simply getting old? He's 147 years, which is, pretty old for you and me, but not massively old in the time. He's an old man, but there's certainly men who live longer. But has he done all that he needs to do? And now it's time to let go. Is that another way that we renew our faith? Is when we start to let go of the things that we don't have to do anymore. We hand these things over to others. Judah would be the one here. Do we hand these things over to Joseph? Would be another one here. Do we hand these things over to God? Because I'm not doing them anymore. I don't have to. I'm not proving myself to anybody or anyone. I am just now handing things over, and I am with God. I don't know. That passage makes me think about that though. It makes me think about the things that I do when my faith is not as strong as I would like it to be. Things that I do when I am being distracted from the importance of my faith because I'm having a good time and things are good. Anyway, I'm going to stop right now and leave it with you to wonder a little bit about what's going on with Joseph and Jacob and Israel. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. Let us pray. Loving God, thank you for the inspiration that we find in Scripture. Thank you for the quiet moments when you just cause us to pause and to wonder, to rethink and reimagine, and suddenly we see things, hear things that we were missing before. A new perspective dawns on us. And we recognize that in that new perspective, we are finding new ways to hear your words. Thank you, God, for the wonder of this time. We pray through the Holy Spirit and in Jesus' name. Amen. And with that, my friends, I will bid you adieu. Have a wonderful evening or whatever time of day this is. Do come back tomorrow. And until we connect again, God bless you. Please know that God sees you and God loves you. God's love moves through you, and that matters more than you can ever imagine. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.